Adam and I love this topic today, talking about the most holy Eucharist, the source and summit of the Christian life. Adam, I think this is going to be a very impactful, less than 30 minutes talking about Jesus in the Eucharist.
I hope so, Deb. You know, in my lifetime as a cradle Catholic, the Eucharist is something that it was just part of life. You know, you receive communion since you were a little child. It just became the normal thing that you did, you know? And then as life has gone on and I've grown in my understanding of the faith, and then of course encountered, you know, the supernatural and the preternatural in these recent years working in the church, my appreciation for it has just exploded. Because I fully understand, or at least, well, I shouldn't say fully, I understand as much as my little human mind can, that God is present in a special way in the Eucharist, that Jesus is there, body, blood, soul, and divinity, as the church says, present in the Eucharist in a veiled form, usually, meaning it still looks like bread, right? Mm-hmm. But Jesus is truly there. Well, one of your favorites, soon-to-be saints, Blessed Carlo Acutis, did this big project on Eucharistic miracles. Now, a lot of people maybe have heard of Eucharistic miracles, but I bet there's a lot of people that haven't. So, for those that don't know, the Catholic Church believes truly that when the host is consecrated during the Mass, that bread becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, even though it doesn't look any different. There are certain events down through history where the Eucharist turns into actual flesh and blood. And I know that would sound strange to some people. Now, Blessed Carlo Acutis documented about 187 approved Eucharistic miracles that he could find from the history of the Church. Looking EWTN notes, 107 that are approved for public veneration. Mm-hmm. And so those are slightly different things. Like for public veneration is kind of a higher standard. So we don't have time for the details there, but you know, sometimes it's just the local bishop that investigated, sometimes it's a broader investigation, that type of thing. More than 100 is the point. I thought we could maybe just talk about 3 of them because they involve modern medical investigation.
Right.
What do you think?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I know that you're highlighting Lanciano. I went on a Eucharistic miracle pilgrimage to Rome, to Italy, and one of the places we visited was where the actual miracle took place. Absolutely amazing. And you got to take pictures. It's right there in display. And so I know you want to highlight it and talk about the surroundings of what also, you know, who was present, how it affected the people there, you know, what it meant for everyone when they did the testing and they realized that it was, you know, Jesus's blood and the heart muscle. It goes on. And so there's so much to be said about Eucharistic miracles. I can see why Blessed Carlo Acutis wanted to document them all. The Vatican did accept his online exhibit, and it went, and I mean, of course it's gone viral. I mean, it's just amazing what that young man did. And I think he did it when he was 12 or 13 years old. He finished it right before he died at 15. I mean, you're talking just extraordinary. And some of those Eucharistic miracles, Adam, they're not very well known, but they are extraordinary with the details. It'll blow people's minds. If you ever get to see the exhibit, I would highly recommend it for our Morning Joy listeners. But go ahead, why don't you start with Lanciano? It's my favorite, actually.
Okay. So this event happened in the 8th century, so in the 700s. There was a priest that was saying Mass in Lanciano, Italy. And he was having, you know, some doubts in his mind, doubts about the true presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Maybe he was, you know, having a crisis of faith. Maybe he was wrestling with the theology of it, but he was doubting. And at the time in the Mass, when the consecration happens and the priest says the same words that Jesus said at the Last Supper, and the bread becomes the flesh and blood of Christ. The wine becomes the blood, the bread becomes the flesh. At that moment, the host he was holding turned to flesh, and the wine turned to blood, literally. And of course, when he reported this after it happened to his superiors and the public started hearing about it, a lot of people doubted initially. But the church investigated, and the church decided, based on their investigation back then, about 1,200 years ago, that it was a real miracle. Okay, so you say, all right, well, that's the 700s. Like, they don't have much science. They don't have a mass spectrometer. They don't have infrared cameras, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so this is where it gets really neat. In 1971, okay, so now it's been like 1,200 years. This material's been sitting there in the church for 1,200 years. People have come to see it. They're not allowed to touch it or interact with it, but it's been there, right? Mm. In theory, exposed to the air, drying up, decaying, turning to dust. Well, here it is, 1,200 years later, it's still there.
Right.
And a pathologist and a professor of medicine now analyzes it with modern stuff, right? Modern equipment, modern understanding. It's 1971, so it's not as modern as we have now, but it's pretty good, okay? He determines that it's cardiac tissue. He determines that it's blood type AB. He doesn't find indications that it's been preserved, like formaldehyde or something else, to account for the fact that it's still there 1,200 years later. Now, the blood is coagulated into solid material, which happened right away when the miracle first happened. That's how the priest reported it. And the flesh is still there. Then in 1981, a decade later, they get a second opinion from a different medical expert. They also conclude it's cardiac tissue. It's blood type AB. There's no preservatives. And that's, to at least my research, the last time it's been analyzed, because it was allowed twice in modern times. Different doctors, different conclusions. I know you know a lot more about this one, Deb. Is there anything you want to add?
It was just so cool to be in Italy, and we had Mass right there, where you would actually, the altar was right in front of us. But then if you would look up, there was the display of the miracle, the Eucharistic miracle, right above. Pretty incredible. When you first came into the church, it's kind of odd because, all of a sudden you're in the church and you're like, okay, where is it? Where is it? And then they say, well, look right here. And you look up a little bit and there is it on display. And it's pretty powerful. You kind of don't know what to say because it's just so unique, and it's pretty amazing. So yeah, I think it's one of the most well documented Eucharistic miracles. But yeah, I know you're going to move on to some of the other ones, which have an interesting connection to Pope Francis.
Mm-hmm. So this one we'll get into a little bit, and then we'll go to the break, and then we'll finish it up on the other side. So now we're going to come up to 1996. This happened in 96. So now we're not talking ancient times. We're not talking, Middle Ages or long time ago. We're talking about 1996 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. After Mass, people were cleaning up and getting ready, to close up the church and putting things in order. And one of the people assisting the priest found a discarded host that was kind of left on the edge of a candle holder at the back of the church. Well, that, there's protocols for what you do when a host is found kind of on the floor or discarded. So the priest very carefully took it and put it in a bowl of water and locked it in a safe at the back of the church. That is the normal procedure, is to put the host in water, either in a glass or in a bowl, because the bread will dissolve completely into the water over about 24 hours or less. So that was basically the normal thing that you would do on a day-to-day basis. Hopefully this doesn't happen every day, but when it did, that's what you do. Okay. Well, he comes back and he has occasion to open the safe, and he checks on it about 8 days later, assuming that it would be dissolved, and then he could pour that water down the special sink that they use for, for holy objects that are being cleaned.
It goes straight down into the earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't go into the plumbing.
That's right.
Okay, and those are usually in the sacristy. So he goes to check it, right? Thinking, okay, I'm going to pour the water out. What does he find in the bowl? He finds what looks like flesh and blood. There's tissue, what looks like human tissue in the bowl, and there's blood clots. Well, he's not sure what to think. So he reports it to his superior, which was Archbishop Bergoglio, now Pope Francis. He was the archbishop at the time. Well, the archbishop tells him, get it photographed professionally, not with your cell phone, but have a professional photographer come over with the proper lighting, document it, high resolution. Let's see exactly what's there. So they do that. And there's very high resolution, very good pictures, that some of which you can find online. Well, they don't tell anybody. Okay, they document it, then they lock it away in the safe. And they leave it there. They leave it there for a year. They check on it. It still hasn't disintegrated. Mm-hmm. So at this point, the archbishop says, okay, let's have a professor of medicine, a pathologist, look at this. But we can't tell him what it is. We can't say where it came from because he's going to be biased if we do. Isn't that fascinating?
It's pretty amazing.
The church is so interested in objective truth.
We don't need these miracles in order to prove that Jesus is truly present in the most holy Eucharist. But our good Lord is so kind and loving that he provides all of this evidence so that it will help us to believe and those around us. So why don't you continue, Adam, finish this story and then move on to the miracle in 2006.
Okay, so remember, we're in Buenos Aires, Argentina. It's now 1997, and it's been a year since the priest saw this Eucharist that they had found discarded at the back of the church. He was dissolving it in water in a bowl, and he found that it looked like tissue, human tissue, flesh, and blood. And it's been a year, right? So the archbishop, Pope Francis, he was then Archbishop Bergoglio, had it photographed, and then they locked it away. And now it's been a year. They check on it again, Deb. It's still there. At this point, the archbishop says, okay, we need to know for sure what's going on.
Right, what's going on?
So they find like the most decorated, highly educated, bunch of titles, professor of medicine, cardiac expert, okay? They take it to him, and they don't tell him where it came from because they don't want him to be biased. They just say, hey, what is this sample? Okay? Mm-hmm. He analyzes it with very modern equipment, right? Because we're talking late 90s here. He found a few conclusions. This is before they told him where it came from. They said it's flesh. He said it's flesh and blood. It's cardiac tissue. It's cardiac tissue from near the left ventricle valve of the heart. Based on the tissue in the blood, this sample was taken from a living person, not from a cadaver. And because the way some of the white blood cells were pushed into the muscle tissue, it indicated tremendous blunt force trauma to the chest that battered the heart so strongly that the white blood cells were pushed into the muscle fibers. And guess what the blood type was? AB.
Wow. That just really hit me hard. I've read the details before about this particular miracle, but the blunt force trauma just, as we're getting ready to go into the season of Lent. I mean, to really think about this in a deep way, you can get very emotional with this. But yeah, there's another miracle. I mean, how do you? It's incredible that God is doing this for us so that it can help us to believe.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to pick one more and we'll come up a little bit closer to now. So we can jump ahead to 2006, and now we're down in Tixtla, Mexico. That's Tixtla. Okay, it's October 2006. They're distributing communion. A sister that was distributing communion looked down, and she saw that one of the hosts had blood on it. Well, she gets upset, and she takes it to Father immediately and says, I don't know what to do. I'm upset. Something happened. Well, the priest takes a look at it, sets it aside. They finish distributing the other hosts for communion. They wrap things up for Mass. They had doctors study the host in what looked like blood. They concluded what? That it was human tissue, human blood, that there was human DNA, and the blood type was?
AB.
AB.
Consistent with all the other Eucharistic miracles.
Mm-hmm. So, to me, Deb, the Eucharistic miracles, it's a really neat reminder that miracles didn't just happen in the Gospels.
Right.
It's not just ancient stories that happened to Stone Age people, and, of course those things never happen these days. There are healings that I've heard about from priests that were, in hospital settings. I know somebody who had cancer and was about to have surgery to remove it, went to a particular shrine, to somebody whose cause is in the works. They prayed there. They went to do the surgery. They did one final scan before they started to plan out something about the surgery, and tumor was gone. I've seen so many of these things in my life. And these miracles that God gives us about the Eucharist, number one, they're really neat miracles because they're open to the scrutiny of medical science. God wants man's mind and his reason to be applied to these. He makes them available. They don't decay, they don't disappear. He allows that. That should say something to the modern world, especially when they purposely avoid bias and they find objective people and they just say, what is this? They don't say, this came from a church, we think this is a Eucharistic miracle. They just get the straight take. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Well, just a couple things before we send it back for the rest of Morning Joy. Why are we doing the next right thing on the Eucharist? Well, because we are going into the season of Lent, and it's very, very important we go deeper. And Adam and I are constantly about issuing challenges for ourselves and for everyone who's willing to listen to the next right thing, and also the spirit world. And some of the ways to go deeper is to attend and to view one of these Eucharistic miracles exhibits that are going around the whole world, either online or at a church or at some event. The one that Blessed Carlo Acutis put together, you can view them, and they're very, very powerful. Or we really believe too that Matthew Kelly did a phenomenal job with 33 Days to Eucharistic Glory. Great work that he has done, and we would encourage folks to go deeper with this 33 days. There's also 33 Days to Eucharistic Glory for kids. Wouldn't that be wonderful to do that with your children, with your grandchildren? So think about it. Matthew Kelly, again, has done a phenomenal job being very well-rounded in the approach of getting folks to consecrate themselves to Jesus and really fall deeply in love with the Eucharist. And so we wanted to share that, Adam, with our Morning Joy listeners. Final comments.
My final comment, Deb, is if you're Catholic and you've been away from Mass, so you haven't received communion in a long time, or even if you haven't received it for a short time, please resume going to Mass on Sundays, which are holy days of obligation, and the other special holy days of obligation outside of the Sundays. Please get in a state of grace and start going. I can just speak for myself, Deb. The minutes after communion, when I go back to the pew and kneel down, close my eyes, and just try to be with the Lord and listen and just be still. Mm-hmm. Or maybe I'm praying about something, but usually I'm just trying to be still with him. Really, that's like the most important moments of my week.
Yeah. The most intimate moment with Jesus. Absolutely.
So, please avail yourself of that if you have the gift of being able to. And if you're considering entering the church to be able to receive communion, please consider it. There is really something special here.
Right. Absolutely. So that's why we decided to dedicate the Next Right Thing to the Most Holy Eucharist, the source and summit of the Christian life.
Thank you for listening to The Next Right Thing with angel specialist Debbie Georgiani and religious demonologist Adam Bly. Debbie and Adam are daily contributors to the live radio program Morning Joy, hosted by Keith Downey every weekday on the Guadalupe Radio Network. For more authentic Catholic content, go to grnonline.com/joy.